Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's Rebuilding Australia Zoom on the subject of strong communities grow from stronger connections, retaining social cohesion when communities are changing. Today's presentation is by Linda Ford from Mosaic's Intercultural Solutions. For 37 years, Linda has worked in Queensland, South Australia, and Victoria in a paid capacity in local and state governments, and in business and in a paid or voluntary capacity in the community services sector. For almost 20 years of that time, she worked and lived in Logan City in Queensland. Yay for all of us Queenslanders. All of these roles required her in one way or another to incorporate cultural diversity in her work. For more than 25 years, she has practiced interculturalism in all of her policy writing, program design and practice, and business projects. In 2007, she found out what had been doing naturally had a name: interculturalism, which is the active bringing together of people from different cultures, faiths, and language backgrounds. She knows that it works, and since 2013 has advocated consistently for all levels of government to adopt an intercultural approach to the work they do and the strategies and policies that they write. In 2016, she was awarded a Centenary of Federation Medal for her services to multiculturalism in Queensland. In 2016, she was formally recognised by the Council of Europe as an intercultural expert, one of only 3 outside of Europe, which is an outstanding achievement. And in 2021, she was awarded the Order of Australia Medal for services to multiculturalism in Victoria. Linda, welcome to today's presentation. If you'd like to unmute yourself, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Charles, and thank you everyone for coming. I know that it's not an easy time sometimes to get an hour off, so I really do appreciate you coming along. I want to begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land, the Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung and Bunurong peoples of the Kulin Nation, where I'm privileged to live, work and play in Melbourne. This acknowledgement is not a tick box for me. It's an active reminder that connection, belonging and resilience are the lived experience of the traditional owners of Australia for more than 60,000 years. First Nations communities have navigated extraordinary change, colonisation, displacement and cultural disruption, and they've sustained cohesion through story, kinship and deep relation with country. I pay my respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are with us today. Thank you, Charles, again for the invitation to speak today, and welcome everyone and thank you for coming. We're a very mixed group, so I'd like to make the presentation as relevant as possible to everyone, and I have a number of questions that I'll be asking along the way, so if you're happy to contribute, please do so via the chat. All of our communities are facing different challenges and opportunities for social cohesion in Australia, and we're going to be developing a bit of a list of what you might be doing or thinking of doing as an opportunity to benefit all of us. So Charles will keep an eye on the chat box for us, and if you have any questions, just ask them at the end of the presentation. Right, so why are we here talking about change and social cohesion? And I will just get this right, which is always my worry. Okay, so why are we here talking about change and social cohesion? Because it's the one constant in Australia's story and in the story of every single country in the world. Cities expand and evolve, regional centres reinvent themselves, small towns see families and new people moving in and out. They might have a good year or a bad year, and all of these events reshape the day-to-day lives that we live in our communities. Sometimes change feels exciting for us, and at other times it's unsettling, and long-term neighbours might wonder, will my community still feel like home? Will my values and histories here still matter? And new residents of any community, regardless of where they were born, might ask themselves, will I ever really belong here? And all of those reactions are valid and all of them deserve answers. But for me, the overall question is, how do we manage the personal, social, political and economic changes that happen to us individually every day? And that's individually for me, collectively for us, and also for our families and the broader community. And the answer to that is only ever connection. When we're positively connected to those people around us, then change can feel like growth. Now, right up front, I'm going to be really contentious, so hear me out. When we cut through all of the politics and when it all boils down to it, Australia only consists of three people. People who were born overseas and their immediate descendants who have strong ties with their parents' culture or faith backgrounds. People who are born overseas, you probably know, and make up 51.5% of Australia's population. So that is people born overseas and second generation children who have at least one parent born overseas. So 51.5% of Australia's population were born overseas. But you wouldn't know it if you were looking at major political, social, sporting, or financial, corporate, other decision-making institutions in our country. The second group of Australians are First Nations peoples, and they may have been born overseas or in Australia, but they're still the First Nations peoples of this country. They've consistently said that they're not part of a multicultural agenda. And then there's this third group of people who are, I think, often forgotten when we create policies and strategies for First Nations peoples and people born overseas. These are the groups of people that I grew up with, the third or more generation Australians from European or UK backgrounds. My background's German, Irish, Scottish, and French. And the minimum of those are 4 generations, and then the longest is 7 generations. So these are kind of the people that I know. I grew up with them. They're my extended family, my extended friendship groups. These are people having the sorts of conversations that I'm going to be talking about today. They often don't see themselves and are not seen by others as being culturally diverse, but an important percentage of them, and especially young men from third or more generation European backgrounds, are feeling disenfranchised and are feeling that they're not sure of their place in Australia. They're generally not connected with any government strategies or plans, and if we don't make a place for them in those strategies, then how do we know who they are or what they think or what they want? Or how they can support and be supported in social inclusion and cohesion strategies. And that's why at every level of government and intercultural policy strategy framework and action plan that includes each of those three groups, it's critical. How government leaders manage and plan for cultural diversity right now is a model for how the community will come together to live harmoniously in the next 5 years, 2030, or the next 25 years to 2050. So why does connection matter at the moment? And I think there are many more reasons than the three that I'm going to show you now. But essentially, the first one is that connection reduces fear, and fear grows in the presence of uncertainty and the absence of knowledge. I live in inner city Melbourne. My community is changing because we now have not high rises, but 3 or 4 story buildings, for example. There's a lot of inner city urban development, which is what we want. We don't want people living miles away from the city, having trouble with transport, costs of living, etc. So my community is changing. And if I have never spoken to someone from a different cultural background who might be coming to the area, then my knowledge of those people will probably be filled by stereotypes and assumptions that I'm making. Where I also get my news from and how often can feed my fear. So if I only read the Herald Sun or the Courier Mail or the Adelaide Advertiser, I only watch Channel 7 News, I only watch A Current Affair, and then get more of my news from Facebook, then what I'll be looking at will be filled by the algorithms, and they're unlikely to give me a good sense of positive social connection. But if I'm walking down the street and I smile and I say hello to start with, and if I'm curious about new residents and if they can trust me enough to put themselves at physical and psychological risk about what I might say to them and vice versa, then once we have a chat, we'll discover shared interests in gardening or music or kids and being at the same school, or then our fear lessens, our fear of each other. But if we don't share a common language, we might only ever remain at the hello stage. And I think that's fine as well, because it does mean that we're acknowledging each other as humans living in the same spaces. Secondly, that connection builds trust. So trust grows through repeated, consistent acts of care. It's the neighbour who brings your bin in while you're away or at work. It's the shopkeeper who asks you how your family's going. Parents who volunteer at the tuck shop, coaches who coach the footy teams. Over time, all of those small acts create the trust and the relationships that hold communities together. And then thirdly, that connection creates resilience. And we've all seen it in disasters, whether it's a pandemic or bushfires or floods. Formal systems are important, but it's usually the neighbours and informal networks that respond first. And that's because people know each other. They check to see how each other are going, and then they share resources and they step up before official help arrives. So connection is about relationships and knowing that other people care for you and about you, and also that you can contribute to their lives in some meaningful kind of way. And finally, that you're not alone. Whatever it is that's going on in your community, there's at least somebody who's going to smile at you. So I just want to have a quick question, which is about the biggest changes that you've noticed in your community over the last 5 years. You don't have to write it down. I just really want you to think about what that has meant for you and your families and other community members in terms of the way that communication and connection with others may have changed. Of course, if you'd like to put it into the chat box, you're very welcome. Right, so before we go any further into the presentation, I'd like to have a look at a few definitions as we often have different understandings, and I just want to make sure that for the purposes of this presentation that we're on the same page. There's a lot of detail, and these are going to be simple slides explaining very complex things. So just understand that they're meant to be basic at this point in time. If you don't agree with them, or if you want more information, then have a look at my LinkedIn profile because I give much more comprehensive information in the posts. If you still disagree after reading the posts, then get in touch because I really would like to know your opinion. And I'll warn you that I'm not very creative when it comes to graphic design. So the slides are pretty rustic, shall we say. And we'll start off with one that looks good at this stage, which is around intercultural exchange. So I mentioned the term before, but what actually is it? And after doing years of this, my definition is that intercultural exchange is about the policy and practice of intentionally bringing together people, it could be groups, individuals, or families, for the purpose of meaningful interaction. What we want to do with that is to reduce fear of the other, to reduce racism, to create new businesses, enhance social inclusion, strengthen community resilience, and then to embed social cohesion. We'll move next into the definition of interculturalism, but I'm also keen to get a bit of an understanding of your sense of it at the moment. So from 1 to 10, and if you can put this in the chat box, from 1 to 10, how much do you think you know about interculturalism as a definition, as a practice, or as an intercultural approach to your work? So 1 being the lowest, 10 being the highest. Yeah. Great. Thank you very much for that. And what's on average, Charles? What do we have? I can't see what it is.
The average is probably around the 5 mark, 4 to 5.
Yep, great. Okay,
Yep.
so people have heard of the term before, but
Yep.
don't necessarily know how to apply it or how important it is in your work at this point in time and into the future. So thank you for that. Right. We'll have a look at interculturalism, and can I say the slides get worse from here? All right, so interculturalism, because of my advocacy for interculturalism, it's a complementary approach to multiculturalism, and over time I've been told that I'm left-wing and others have said that I'm right-wing, so I'm guessing that interculturalism sits in the middle somewhere, which is exactly the place that it should be. This is my intercultural slide, and again, it's based on years of practice, and I'm a practitioner. So there's no theory in this, but I have had a number of academics check it, and they agree that this is sound. Due to time constraints, really, I want to talk about the prefix of inter, meaning within and between. So international, interaction, interconnection, interpersonal. Interculturalism doesn't replace multiculturalism, and at its most basic, it actually can't replace it because as an intercultural society, people from different backgrounds need to interact with each other. So if we don't have people from different backgrounds, i.e. a multicultural society, then it can't work. People would just be talking to each other and it wouldn't be intercultural. So what we're looking at here with interculturalism is that it's a methodology to use to create relationships between people from one culture with another culture or faith or both. And the slides show strong lines between those groups of people. It makes sense that the stronger the lines, the stronger the relationship, resulting in stronger social inclusion and cohesion. We want the busyness of this slide to be the bridging social capital that you see. We want that because we really want to always understand the intersections that make up a person and a community, and that we can act as connectors of people, regardless of their faith, age, gender, ability, etc. And again, please have a look at my LinkedIn post because this is a really basic understanding or diagram at this stage. Like I said, it's all downhill from here. So here's my multicultural slide. I'm getting back to the basics of multiculturalism after more than 35 years in the field with, as we said before, about 20 of those living and working in Logan and another few years living and working in Melbourne and for City of Melbourne. So this slide looks busy, but it's not as busy as the intercultural slide. And again, because of time constraints, I want to just highlight the prefix multi, which means lots of. So multilingual, multitasking, multifaceted. In this case, Australia is a multicultural society. It has lots of cultures. Again, people might disagree, but I think often what we're looking at in a multicultural society is essentially geography. Where do you come from? What's your culture? What's your religion? And that's a mismatch between who government policy believes is part of a multicultural society and who people see themselves as being or not being part of that society. I mentioned before about people from third or more generation Australians. So those people generally don't see themselves as multicultural, even though they might still be practicing some ancestral traditions. People also don't often see them as being multicultural. First Nations Australians, regardless of whether they were born in Australia or overseas, as I said before, are clear that they're not part of a multicultural agenda. So that leaves only people who are born overseas. Does this mean that they are the only people that we consider multicultural or part of a multicultural agenda and strategy? And to be honest, part of my job is to read a lot of different strategies, multicultural economic development, reconciliation action plans, arts and culture, for example. And basically what I read in those government strategy documents is that, yes, the people who are considered multicultural or part of a multicultural policy were people born overseas. And that then locates multiculturalism into overseas born people from various cultural backgrounds. Multiculturalism often can't cope with people choosing to recognise all of their cultures or all aspects of their intersectional lives. And often they're made to choose one, So where are you from? Well, I was born in the UAE. I grew up in Pakistan and I spent my high school in Australia. Yes, but which one are you really? Which one do you most identify with? When in fact, you might identify with all of those at any one time, or more with one or the other, depending on who you're actually with. So one of the things that is important to us is that we need to be making sure that we're not just looking around to see who's multicultural, but we also want to see how well people from different cultures are interacting. So some questions around, if you walk down the street in any of our major regional centres or in your community, who do you see talking with each other, walking with each other, Do you see groups of students who are sitting together? In which case, how diverse are those groups? Do you see workmates walking down the street, eating their lunch together or in restaurants? How diverse are those groups? Leaving aside the policy and ideology of multiculturalism, who do you actually see? Where are they? Where do you think they should be? And what does it mean for the future of Australia? One of the other things that I've heard is that interculturalism is just another word for assimilation. And interculturalism is a lot of things and it isn't a lot of things. So, for example, interculturalism isn't a replacement for multiculturalism. It isn't just another ism. It isn't only about migrants, and interculturalism absolutely isn't assimilation. And in fact, it's the opposite of that. Assimilation is about making people fit into the dominant society. And the White Australia policy, and I was amazed when I read all of this, the White Australia policy was one of the very first acts of Parliament in 1901, which was the first year of the Australian Parliament. In other words, one of the first priorities of Australia was to keep out non-white migrants. And these, coupled with the 1835 proclamation of terra nullius, or that Australian land belonged to no one, meant that white people were supreme and everyone else had to either fit in or not be allowed in the first place. So what I can say without hesitation is that assimilation, and I know people still talk about migrants assimilating, but it is the worst possible way for Australia to sustain a harmonious and cohesive country into the future. Interculturalism expects and facilitates relationships between people who are in some important way different to someone else, and that is the opposite of assimilation. Where interculturalism uses bridging social capital and multiculturalism and assimilation use bonding social capital, social inclusion is interesting because it requires bridging and bonding social capital in order to create a sense of belonging. So having a quick look at some of the elements, we're talking about participation, which is the ability to engage in all aspects of society. That it's not about saying you can come into our social life, but you can't come into or you can't be part of our economic life in our community. It's about the opportunity where people are given a chance to learn and work and connect with their communities and also to share resources. The element of dignity and respect is where people feel valued and we're fostering a sense of belonging. We also need to be thinking about who have voices. As I said before, there are many people in positions in Australia that don't look like the rest of Australia. So one of the things that we need to be thinking about is who influences decisions and how do we every day as Australians living in communities, how are we able to influence those decisions that impact our lives? And then the final element is around support, where basic needs are met and where there are mechanisms to deal with personal crises like illness, for example, and where people can maintain their security and their dignity. But I think we also can't look through rose-coloured glasses. You know, inclusion and cohesion isn't always fabulous. We need to remember that they can also act against society, because if people don't feel included in their broader family or community, they'll seek that sense of belonging somewhere else. And sometimes that appears as antisocial behaviour, such as gangs or drugs or some other form of action against their community. Let's have a look at social cohesion. And again, there are many definitions, but I think we all know that it's basically about sticking together. It's also interesting because, like social cohesion, it requires bridging and bonding social capital. And for me, it's about the degree of unity, the connection, the solidarity within a society. It's characterised by positive social connections, a sense of belonging, and a shared commitment to the common good. And also for me, it's about stability. A chaotic community cannot create cohesion. It's pretty basic. So cohesion is the glue that holds our communities together, and it involves people appreciating diverse backgrounds, being mutually supportive. And as we said before, cohesion is built on trust, and that's what mutual support does. It's also about reducing but not ignoring at all times, trying to mutually resolve conflict through intercultural interaction. And we want to, in a cohesive society, to be working together to achieve shared social goals. Not surprisingly, cohesion is linked directly to social inclusion and belonging, and it shows up in areas about whether or not people feel safe in their neighbourhood, whether they feel they belong, whether they trust one another and the institutions around them. So if they've got corruption happening in any government institutions, then that's not something that can create a cohesive society. And also whether they do or have the opportunity to participate in community life, such as joining clubs or volunteering and attending events, that's also a critical part of cohesion. So cohesion also doesn't mean sameness, and it doesn't mean assimilation. And again, I've heard some kind of conversations happening in the periphery around that. It doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean that everyone thinks or acts alike, and it doesn't even mean that conflict disappears. But what it means is that the differences between us all are managed respectfully, that people feel that they're part of the same we or us, and that even when they disagree, and even when they want to opt in and opt out sometimes of the we, regardless of whether they were born in Australia or overseas or First Nations peoples, all of those reasons are the reasons why social cohesion is important. But it's fragile. And I'm doing a webinar on the 29th of October again with Charles, where I talk about fragmentation and the word that people are starting to use, the cracks in multiculturalism. When social cohesion is weak, mistrust creeps in and division takes hold. It's not guaranteed, and it must be built, nurtured, monitored, and renewed. So again, another question. If you scored cohesion in your community right now, out of 10, what score would you give it and why? And do you think that it's the same as it was 2 years ago? Was the score now higher or lower than it was? And again, you don't have to answer in the chat box. It's really just a question of just taking a moment to think as we're carried along every day, actually, where are we up to? How are things happening within our communities? So in terms of the warning signs, some of the early warning indicators of declining social cohesion include withdrawal, where individuals, families or groups stop coming to events or using community spaces because they're no longer feeling accepted. It's also where us and them language is used more often, where conversations shift from our community to their group versus our group. And it's also where the conversations about they get this and we don't start to happen. And I think some of those issues are legitimate. I don't think that we should be pushing those to the side or making it seem as though that those issues aren't important to everybody, not just to people born overseas or First Nations or third generation Australians. They're actually important questions for us all. The next is around rumours and bullying and misinformation. And we know that a false story spreads on Facebook really quickly, and it doesn't even have to go viral to create harm. We know about exclusion from decisions. And as I said before, who are the voices that are dominating public conversations and community consultations, and who's absent? We see declining volunteering and community participation. And when people feel less ownership of their place, they pull back from contributing. So when they start to pull back from one, they might pull back from another, etc. If you can notice the alignment with, or in fact, the opposition to the slides on social cohesion and inclusion, these are basically the opposite. These are the warning signs that we all need to be aware of. We need to be thinking of them as hairline cracks in a house, where if we catch them early, then they're easy to repair. And if they're ignored, then they widen until the structure's at risk. I might skip over this one. So just as fragmentation doesn't usually happen as one big blow up, but it happens slowly when people aren't noticing, so does social cohesion. It usually doesn't happen through one extreme event, and if it does, it may not last long after that event. Social cohesion is a result of the everyday things that happen every day. And so I'm going to take a few minutes just to have a look at the role of everyday spaces and leaders and actions that all contribute to maintaining social cohesion during times of change. The first one, again, is simple and powerful. Cohesion isn't an event or even a program. It's a culture that happens within a community, or your workspace, or your street, or the local park or library. It's, as I was saying before, about saying hello to someone who's new at the school gate, or making space for difference in a conversation. A library, a park, a public pool, or an off-leash dog beach might not look like a strategy document, but it is actually a strategy. All of those are strategies for creating greater social cohesion. They give people who are different the opportunity to come together for a common reason and have new conversations. So things like, if you're at the beach, what's the weather like? What kind of dog do you have? What are the books that you're reading at the moment? These plants in the park are lovely, or the playground's fantastic for children. Those sorts of conversations that we may not ordinarily be able to have unless it was somewhere where we're brought together serendipitously. In terms of everyday leadership, these are not usually people that we might think of. Often we think of leaders being mayors or CEOs or Prime Minister, for example, but these are people who make communities livable and cohesive. So they're the librarians who ensure that cultural differences are celebrated. They're the volunteers who deliver Meals on Wheels, community or faith leaders who show wisdom, compassion. During times of crisis, they might also create open days in their places of worship. There are workplace mentors who will always help colleagues to settle into jobs and make sure they're included and have career pathways. Those everyday leaders are the ones who set the tone of interpersonal interaction because of their small choices that they make every single day. And we know that when those leaders are doing these small actions, that cohesion becomes embedded because people know and trust each other. Everyday actions. So again, while strategies are important, the day-to-day actions of ordinary people are the strongest supporters of local cohesion. It's the neighbour who invites a new resident to the street barbecue and asks them, what kind of dietary requirements do you have? Do you need halal food? Do you not eat pork? Are you vegetarian or vegan? What are the kinds of things that we would be wanting to do as a street and new neighbours to help you feel as though you're part of us and settling into our community? They're also the teacher who knows how to pronounce every student's name correctly, and that becomes incredibly important to children from kinder all the way through. To have your name consistently spelt incorrectly or said incorrectly is devastating for children and for adults. It's also around modelling, all of us being able to model inclusion through the everyday acts that we do. And again, as I said before, it can be just as simple as saying hello and having eye contact with people you don't know. And if you've got to know them, then stopping and just having a quick chat. One of the things that really bothered me when I was doing the research for this is that Reconciliation have put out something called the Reconciliation Snapshot for 2024. And it found that only 15%, and I'm about to use their words, of multicultural Australians, 15% of multicultural Australians, and only 29% of Anglo-Australians, again their words, have had personal experiences with First Nations peoples at all, ever. Not just in 2024, but 85% of multicultural Australians and 70% of Anglo-Australians have never had a personal experience with a First Nations person. How does that help social cohesion? What's gone wrong and how can it be fixed? We know that social cohesion can only happen if people know each other, talk to each other, feel safe with each other, if they share positive experiences and memories and laughs, if they have friends and networks outside their usual groups. And if all of this happens properly, then people will have a feeling of belonging. We know that if people don't know each other, if they haven't had a positive relationship of each other, if they haven't had the chance for a laugh or to tell a story, then how does this help social inclusion and cohesion goals? So let's have a look at 6 strategies to maintain cohesion in your community. And I can't stress enough the critical role of local governments, community organisations, and local residents in these strategies. I'm not saying that councils should do everything. They can't and they shouldn't, but staff and elected members can act as people who join the dots, facilitate connections, and leave others to continue the conversations. The first thing will be about making connections. Good programs design helps inclusion. And that can be really basic, like benches in parks that encourage conversation. Community notice boards with information in multiple languages. Specifically reaching into a range of communities to find coaches or band leaders or tutors or bridge players or community gardeners, because those people will be attracting other people, not just because you want to be growing your membership, but actually because you want all of the knowledge that those people have who ordinarily wouldn't be part of your network or your community garden to come in. And the other thing is because you'll probably find a whole group of people who are delighted that you want to include them. And that could be a small group of people like their family. Something again really basic. So instead of a John or a Mary or a Smith Street, include a Muhammad Street or a Lakshmi Boulevard or a T circuit in new estate developments. Embedding intercultural workplace skills to create team cohesion is really important. And one last idea is providing a free space for intercultural art exhibitions where artists from at least 2 of those 3 different groups of people contribute and collaborate to create a piece of art. Secondly, to find missing voices at every consultation or event, ask who isn't here and who should be here, where are they, and how do I get them? And often those missing voices are the ones we most need. Young people, migrants, business owners, First Nations community members, young men from 3rd or more generation European backgrounds, people with disability, people who get their news from Channel 7 and Facebook, older people, and anyone else who's not usually seen there. Connect them with them, invite them, and once they're there, support them to feel comfortable and able to participate. Because it's possible that because they don't usually attend, they'll seem different to the rest of the group. And if you support their voice being heard the first time, they might actually want to come back. The third one is to respond to misinformation with respect. And we talked earlier about the warning signs that a rumour left hanging can do enormous harm. There are a number of strategies to be able to deal with this. And again, have a look at the Municipal Affairs Victoria website. Celebrate shared pride in place, that cohesion grows when people feel proud of where they live. Even in new suburbs, that was land before it was an estate. It has its own identity. What was it before it had residents, and who are the traditional owners? All of those things help people see themselves as part of a bigger picture and reassures long-term residents that their stories aren't being erased. Then the second last thing is to embolden young people. And I've deliberately used that word embolden because it's about more than just empowering young people. Due to their social networks, online or in real life, young people are connectors and they have positive or negative experiences that can help impact how they see the world. They may need help to build confidence to step forward, to participate in events that bridge intercultural relationships and give them a voice. But when we give them platforms, whether through youth councils or mentoring programs or creative projects, they can become an ambassador for positive social inclusion. And then to build actual relationships that last. And again, I mean, we've all been involved in projects where people talk about partnerships, but they're really not. They're funding, they're transactional. We need to be making sure that we're building actual partnerships. And from the very beginning, looking at what does that partnership consist of? What do we want it to be? Because again, if we're not creating partnerships, then the cohesion goals and KPIs won't be sustainable. And then this is my last rustic slide, I promise, which is that one of the biggest challenges of cohesion is that it's easier to build trust within our own groups, our bonding social capital, than it is across groups, our bridging social capital. It's natural to connect with people who look like us, share our language, have similar beliefs, or live in our part of town. But achieving social cohesion demands that we all expand our circle. That it's probably something we all think we do, but when we start to think about it, do we really? So at the heart of this conversation is the word we. If we is generous and if it includes long-term residents, new arrivals, and First Nations peoples, then we can stretch and adapt without fracturing. It doesn't mean assimilating, it means retaining our languages, cultures, values, faith, etc., but ensuring that we have a shared outlook and values and mutual trust. It means we actively create opportunities to meet people across differences, and it means holding and attending events where long-term residents and new residents have a chance to talk and laugh and share positive experiences. And I think these are really important questions. So when you're doing anything, whether it's as a local resident or whether it's you working in government, for example, who's missing? Who hasn't been invited? Who was invited but didn't turn up? And why didn't they? Whose story hasn't been told? And there's always this question, which is about who turned up, even though they weren't invited. What did they want to get out of it? What did they get out of it? What was their impact on others? And what do we want to invite them to come back? Can we sit in the same room with people whose values we abhor and try to find out more about them so we understand them? And that's the test of social cohesion. Can we disagree without excluding somebody? We all live in multicultural Australia, but do we live intercultural lives? And please don't underestimate the ripple effect of your contribution. You are critical, absolutely critical from a personal perspective, the impact you have on your family and their acceptance of other people, the people within your community, within your workplaces, within the clubs and activities that you undertake. You are absolutely critical to social cohesion, and there are no government policies that will contribute to it unless you contribute to it as well. So much of the work that you do will probably never make the headlines, but every time you wave or smile and you make a decision to genuinely include people rather than exclude people, then that adds up. So Charles, I'll hand over to you for any question or comments. And if you want to talk any further about the presentation or, as I said before, if you want to disagree, just contact me. There's loads of ways to do that. And also, you're very welcome to link with me on LinkedIn. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Linda, that was amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.
I I just have to acknowledge that I've recently come home from a conference talking all about communities, and I pointed out to a number of people in the room that the only people who were in the room were Anglo-Saxon. And I thought, in a country as rich as Australia in terms of all the cultural diversities, the Chinatowns or the Greeks or the Italians or all these sorts of migrant groups that we have, and the Koreans and Chinese, etc., that there's such little representation. I just wonder whether that's a trait that we are yet to embrace other cultures into our communities. I remember going to a PNC meeting many years ago, and 39 different cultures represented, ethnic groups represented in the community. But the only people who were at the PNC meeting were Anglo-Saxons. You know, I think it's a really interesting reflection on our society, and particularly when it comes to volunteering. I know a lot of community organisations are struggling to find volunteers and they're struggling to find people to engage in their communities. But such a large proportion of our communities now are non-Anglo-Saxon. How are we as leaders in our communities actually reaching out to those groups to make them feel part of our groups, to then allow them the confidence to actually volunteer and contribute?
And I speak a lot, Charles, at conferences and events, and and I'm up on stage and I look around and I say, well, where is everybody? And everyone just looks back and say, well, did we lock the door? Like, how come the people in here don't look like the people out there? How did we manage that?
Mm.
How do we actually manage leaving 51.5% of the population out of our conversations on a
Yeah,
regular basis?
yeah, absolutely. Hey, Sean's got a comment here. Thank you, Sean. And thank you to everybody who contributed in the chat and dropped in the fives or the fours or the sevens or whatever. Um, Thank you for a very interesting discussion. Comment: as we grow multiculturally as Australia, how do we protect national security for an amount of the first generation immigrants home is in more than one continent, so more than one national interest may be served, or do we not have to worry about this? I think this is an issue for a lot of people, national security. What's your take on that, Linda?
I think that a lot of people that I've known over the years have left their country of origin because of conflict. And my concern is that we're starting to see international events, lots of international events, not just in the Middle East or Palestine and Gaza, for example, and I won't name them, but lots of other intercultural conflicts that are starting to occur in Australia. Um, I think that it's not possible for us anymore to be isolated from that because we are too complex as a society and we are too diverse as a society to be able to say that that won't happen. The more people there are who are living together, who are different, of course we're going to have that. And in terms of actual national security, that's been an issue forever. I mean, Australia
Mm.
has always had spies and been spies in other countries, for example. Those sorts of elements of national security are much more likely these days. Hacking, for example, that can all be done from overseas. It doesn't have to be done by first generation Australians, and in fact, probably wouldn't be. So people can be. I'm a dual citizen of another country. My my allegiance is to Australia,
Mm.
but other people might be different if they were born in another country. So I can't answer that probably any better than by saying, Australia's always been a contributor to and a victim of national security threats.
Yeah, yeah, no, I think it's a spot on answer. In terms of the way forward for Australia, sorry, Afra's got a question here. I totally concur. Your social cohesion is not a strategy, it's our day-to-day interaction, and how do we respond to it? And everybody needs to contribute. Thank you, Arthur. Um, yes, Ali, you've got a question. If you would like to unmute yourself,
Yes.
you can.
Thanks, Charles. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. So go ahead.
Sorry. For some reason I can't see the virtual hand here, so thank you. And Linda, thank you very much for your presentation. Wonderful. I have been listening and watching some, I guess, more conservative people like um, programs and speeches in the last a year or so. So I've got two questions, if you mind, don't mind. So one, I guess in terms of social identity, the acknowledgement of the country, one of the feedback that I hear from people, especially on the right, is that by actually repeating that this land never be ceded or that there is the repeating the fact that there was a genocide in the past happened to our First Nation. Do you think that we actually undermining the self-confidence of our next generation, that we are actually undermining the sense of pride that we all should have in Australia? Aside from our First Nation, this this land, this beautiful country, this continent It was actually the modern Australia, if you like, built on based on the Christianity, based on the British Anglo-Saxon culture. So, and of course, many state and territory they are working with this nation. But I'm interested in your thought of us repeating this, whether that actually we're creating an issue with us being a proud Australian. This is actually a miracle. In less than two century, we made modern Australia. We made this continent a miracle. Uh, one of the most advanced country in the planet, the best multicultural country in the planet. So I'd like to see your views on this, Linda. Thank you.
Can I just check with you, Ali? So you're wanting my opinion on um, about First Nations peoples, or that?
No, the statement that we often say that this land, been basically occupied or
Yep.
never been ceded. Um, we actually repeating a past history, and whether we should actually do continuing it. And what's your take on in terms of building the confidence of our children in the future?
Yep. My take on that is that I think it's probably only been the last 10 years that Australia has, even on a not even daily but a regular basis, even acknowledged First Nations peoples, and certainly it's only been about 10 years since acknowledgement of country. So until that gets better, and until we constantly understand and think about the role of First Nations peoples, and I think we should continue it. I don't, as I said before, it's not a tick box for me. It's actually an understanding that I didn't have when I grew up about what happened in Australia. I had no idea really until the last 15, maximum of 20 years, about First Nations peoples. I'd never really thought about them as a group of people before, and I certainly didn't know until the last 10 years about frontier wars, for example. So I think we need to keep learning about that. But I think you're right too. I mean, maybe what we can add to the end of that is about the miracle of Australia. I love the way that you've just put that, Ali. I have never I've thought about how fantastic it is, Australia is. And in fact, I've just got back from living overseas for more than a couple of months, more than 2 years. And when I come back, I think about how incredibly lucky we are here. Um, but I also see, because I was living in Europe and the UK, I see some similarities, some warning bells for me. But I also see how backward we are in a whole lot of other ways. So, it's easy to do those comparisons, but and for better or worse. But for me, I think until we properly incorporate First Nations peoples in our thinking, then we should continue on to say it. But I'm happy to add this miracle of Australia and say that you told me that.
Thanks, Ali. Is that a good answer for you?
Thank you. I wonder whether there is a time for a quick question. If not, that's okay.
Yeah,
Thank
no,
you.
no, fire away. Go for your life.
And so, Linda, I know obviously you talk about interculturalism, but maybe it's not. So I want to talk about immigration, whether this is something that you would like to provide a comment. So, how much diversity is too much, Linda? Imagine, so I live in the city of Casey, which is in the southeast metropolitan Melbourne. So imagine, I'm Muslim. So imagine if we say bring a considerable proportion of a particular group in one area. So what you will see, so you will change in demographics. You will see change in character of the community. You will see change in basically everything. So so would you suggest that we actually need to have a sensible immigration where we make sure that the infrastructure built first before bring more people in, and by infrastructure I mean not only the schools and roads and health system, education system, they are very important, but also actually the settlement programs. People who come in, they don't stay in the hotel. I think Tony Abbott said they don't stay in the hotel Australia. They actually need to be on the team Australia. So in my takeaway from his comment was that you have to love this country. You come to this country, you have to accept the values and institutions. The greatness of Australia is about people and values and institutions. So, what do you think about the whether we actually need to have a sensible immigration intake so that the infrastructure actually cope with the immigration? Thank you.
My thought, and I don't want to get into the politics of this, I decided that I would go along to the Melbourne protest a few weeks ago because I wanted to see who was there. I kept being told that it's not about race, that it's about immigration. But really what I saw were, 10,000 white people carrying flags as though the Australian flag only is relevant to white Australian, generally male young men. That's who I saw generally saw at those protests. So for me, there were other people there who were saying, things about health services, for example, and about cost of living. So lots of people were there for lots of reasons, and a lot of the things that people were talking about were not based on migration. So yes, I've worked for many years in the area of settlement services for migrants. I think that when people arrive, everyone should be supported at least for some short period of time, because it does take time to settle in. But I also agree, and the migration numbers, and there's a really good article in The Age about this. But basically, in 2022, 21-22, there was an agreement made by the former Morrison government about bringing in people to replenish the numbers of people who didn't come in during COVID. What happened then was that this kind of trying to bring everyone in at the same time to make up the numbers and also to fill some of the skills gaps. So this wasn't just let's bring in 500,000 people. This was a response to not being able to have the usual kind of migration that we normally have. I personally think it was too fast because I think that there are now implications for migrants because a whole bunch of people in Australia think that too many of them came over. So that's why we need to be careful of this us and them. I think the other element is that one of the things that has completely shocked me after I've come back after 2 years is how many Australians don't love Australia. So that protest, okay, in my mind, I went, look, people have got a right to protest, and if they want to protest, that's quite fine. But they lost me at standing and listening to neo-Nazis up on the stairs of Parliament House. A lot of thousands of people did that. So to me, that does not love Australia. Secondly, for me, the amount of rubbish in Australia, I literally see people chucking stuff as they walk down the street, empty bottles of drink containers. I'm like, what? What? So I think there are a lot of Australians who don't love Australia. And where am I supposed to send them? Because I know where I want to send them, but where can I send them?
It's an interest, Ali. I think you're right with that.
Thank
Yep,
you.
great. Thank you, my friend. Excellent. Linda, you raise a really interesting point there about pride of country, don't you? Because, and I wonder whether our education systems and whether um, our curriculums in schools, which I know are continually being amended year after year almost, now truly don't reflect or educate young people. And it's not just a school issue, but it's also a parental issue. As parents, it's our responsibility as the primary teachers of our children to effectively multiculturally educate our children, not only just about Australia, but about other countries of the world. Are we losing that education of young people who then have an acceptance of others, an acceptance of different societal standards, empathy, understanding, compassion, integrity, that are some of the core basics of the pride of our country? Are we losing some of that?
I'd be saying it depends on where you're going to school. So,
Sure.
I've spent a lot of years working in Logan City. If you're going to Woodridge High School, you are going to be completely competent in working and living interculturally. That's going to be one of the things that you leave school with. If, however, you are at a school like my nephew's in Brisbane, that has essentially no cultural diversity, I worry about how they're going to be navigating and negotiating through life after this, because they can get taught whatever it is that they're taught at school about diversity, and they can have Harmony Week and all of that, but they're not living interculturally. So I think that the young people who will do much better socially, and even in terms of being able to navigate career paths and manage staff and live in this world that actually we live in, I think, and I don't want my sister to, to know I'm saying this, but I think, in fact, those kids from culturally diverse areas are going to be able to negotiate Australia much better than, unfortunately, my nephews will.
Right. Excellent. Arthur, if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask your question, that'd be great.
Thank you. Thank you, Linda, for all the discussion and your presentation. Now, one of the things that you mentioned in the social cohesion thing is having the people in the room, the right people in the room. There are not two questions probably leading into what I want to ask and have your take. One is we sometimes get the people in the room, but do we really look into what their suggestions are and make it more meaningful? That's what I've noticed in some forums and sessions. And secondly, how do they target the right people to be in? Because it's for the community groups and volunteer groups who are working on the field, in the ground, and working the social cohesion, the practice, what I'd say, they're doing it. For them, getting that seat on the table is really, really difficult. So what do you say about that? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think a lot of the actions are community development principles. So, I did that for a lot of years in Logan. I think in the presentation I talked about reaching in. So literally going to a community, or going to as many communities as possible, and having active relationships with not just the leaders of those communities, but people within them. So it might be faith leaders, or it could be people who go to the mosque or to the temple, for example. So it's about having active networks, and then being able to open whatever it is that you're doing to them. One of my experiences of living overseas is that the way that I negotiated where I was living was through people who already lived there. It's how I learned about social structures, about health systems, all of those sorts of things. So when I say we, if people who are already living here aren't doing that, then how do people learn? So it is our responsibility to reach into those communities and give them information, but also to help them come out. And, as I was saying before, it's not enough just to get people in the room. You actually have to support them. You have to make sure that there are people there who welcome them. And then you also have to make sure that they're supported to have their say in that meeting. And I remember, Charles, one of the workshops I went to, that Peter Kenyon was talking about, one of your webinars, Charles, was actually about having groups of 4 people only having a table that sits 4 people, and that table is square because everyone there can see each other and have conversations across the table. And, I'd never thought about that before. And this was a month ago. I'd never thought about that. So part of it, I think, Arthur, is about providing the environment, or going to get people, bringing them in. Sometimes it's about even picking people up if they live too far away from the event, whatever it is, get them there. And then once they're there, make sure that there are people ready to welcome them into the room, help them find somewhere to sit, help them to start a conversation with someone else that they haven't met before, and just do that kind of step by step, real thinking about what that process would be. And then make sure that it's not just about somebody at the table writing the response, that it's an actual conversation, and that you're watching as a facilitator who's having the conversation around the table, and making sure that those people who wouldn't ordinarily say something are people whose voices are being heard, and that their ideas are being considered. They can see that in writing as a write-up of the minutes or the consultation event, for example, that they're seeing what they're saying being reflected. And then hopefully, if that's been done well enough, they'll want to come back again and bring others with them.
Excellent. Is that a good answer, Arthur?
Thank you. Yeah.
Excellent. Cool. Linda, I'll just finish on this note. I was at this conference last week, and one of the things we found was that in some of these, a particular rural community in Western Australia, that anybody who's new who comes to town, doesn't matter what ethnic group they are, but the community actually has a designated welcoming party, and it's one person, but that person goes and meets every new person who comes to town, and it, introduces themselves. This is all about our community. This is what we do. This is how you can get engaged. And they sit down and have a 2 or 3 hour conversation. And that person actually contributes. They found that these people, all these new people, are actually active contributors to their community because they've been felt welcomed, they've been acknowledged, and they've also had explained to them how the community actually operates. And they go, well, okay, well, I can see myself fitting in there. So I think there's a lot of work we as a community in Australia can do to make all these different ethnic groups and different language groups just feel more comfortable to be part of this great country that they've come to, that they want to make their own.
That's right. And again, if we go back to this principle of interculturalism, bringing together at every single opportunity people who are born overseas, third generation or more Australians, and First Nations peoples, because that is the only way that you're going to get social cohesion. It's absolutely critical. And so that kind of a connector in a community is also critical. And we can all do that. It's really easy for us to do that every single day in our communities. But people don't, because they, don't feel like they're confident enough to do it. They don't feel like they have enough information, etc. But that's what we all do, and it's what we should all do if we're worried about social cohesion.
Excellent. Well, Linda, thank you for today. Wonderful, really enlightening. To all of those who are still online with us today, this has been recorded and will be available tomorrow via a YouTube link, and we'll send a link out to all of you who've attended to watch this again. Please share it with your communities, share it with people as far and wide as possible, because this sort of information can really help create greater strength in our communities. There is another Zoom coming up with Linda. This next one is on small actions lead to big outcomes. Communities don't fracture overnight. It starts with small daily neglect, and that is on October the 29th. That's 12 p.m. in New South Wales and Victoria, 11 o'clock in Queensland, and 9 a.m. in Western Australia, because we will have tricked over to daylight savings. So, Linda, thank you once again for today. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and hopefully you got some great information from today. Linda, thank you.
See
See
you
you
then.
all soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.